Good morning. Before we get started, do you remember the last three memory verses? Psalms 95, 1 through 2. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and exalt him with music and song. Jeremiah 17:7. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. And Proverbs 18:24. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. As you listen to today's Bible story, think about these questions. Number 1, who did Prince Jonathan take with him to the field, and what was their job? Number 2, who was hiding behind a great rock in the field? Number 3, what sad news did Jonathan bring to David? Number 4, what promise did David make to the prince before they parted? Number 5, why wouldn't David permit his soldiers to kill King Saul when Saul laid asleep in the cave? And number 6, how did Saul act when he learned that David spared his life? Saul hunts David, who spares his life. While Saul was at Naioth, David returned and found Jonathan. What have I done? David wanted to know. Why does your father want to kill me? Jonathan said, don't worry, you won't be killed. My father doesn't do anything, large or small, without talking it over with me first. He would not hide any plans from me. Still, David did not feel safe. Your father knows we are friends, and he will not tell you about his plans for me. I tell you, I am only one step away from death. When Jonathan promised to do anything he could to help, David explained, tomorrow is the beginning of the feast. Saul will expect me to eat at his table. I will hide during his feast. If Saul becomes angry because I do not come, you will know he intends to take my life. But if he speaks well of me, then you will know it is safe for me to return. Jonathan promised to let David know. On the third day, David was to hide behind a great rock in the field. Jonathan will come in the morning with a little boy to pick up the arrows. If he told the boy the arrows were on one side of the rock, David would know it was safe to return to his home. If he told the boy the arrows were beyond him, David would know he should run for his life.
Saul's family and guests sat around his table at the feast, but David's place was empty. The first day, Saul did not mention it. The second day, Saul lashes out against David. When Jonathan defended his friend, his father said in anger, "You foolish son, don't you know you will never be king as long as David lives?" Jonathan asked, "What has he done to deserve death?" Saul was so angry that he threw his spear at Jonathan. Now Jonathan knew that David's life was in great danger. He left the table and would not eat anything all day. In the morning, Jonathan told the boy, "Come with me to the field near the city. I am going to shoot with my bow and arrows. You can watch where the arrows fall and get them for me." The two started off together. Outside the city, they came to a wide field. The little boy felt proud to be walking with a prince. Perhaps he even tried to make his steps as long as Jonathan's. Perhaps his eyes sparkled when he saw Jonathan's shiny bow.
Finally, they stopped, and Jonathan fitted an arrow into his bow. He aimed carefully and shot. The boy watched the arrow fall and ran to pick it up. As he ran, Jonathan shot another arrow farther away. He called to the boy, "The arrow is beyond you. Run, hurry, and don't wait." The boy did not know this was a signal. After he got the arrows, Jonathan sent him back to the city. David came out of hiding, and Jonathan ran to meet him. The two friends were so sad that their eyes were filled with tears. Jonathan told David, "Go in peace, and may the Lord be with you." David hurried away, and Jonathan walked slowly back to the city. Because Saul was about to take David's life, David ran to find safety. He came to a city called Nob.
After Saul had taken care of the troublesome Philistines, he went looking for David again. With his army, he came to the wilderness of En-Gedi, where David and his men were hiding in a great cave. Saul became so tired from the march that he went into the cave to rest a while. He did not see David and his soldiers standing in the shadows at the sides of the caves. They watched Saul lie down. When he fell asleep, David crept up to him and cut off part of his robe. David's soldiers wanted to kill Saul. They knew he was not a good ruler, and God was displeased with him. David reminded his men, "Do not touch him, for he has been anointed of God."
Saul awoke and walked out of the cave to join his men. David followed and said, "My lord and king." The king turned and saw David bowing before him. David said, "Why do you listen to people who say I want to take your life? Today I could have killed you while you slept in the cave." Some of my men wanted me to do that, but I would not do anything to harm the Lord's anointed. Saul was so surprised to see David that he didn't know what to say. David went on, "See, I have a piece of your robe that I cut off. Now you know I would not harm you, yet you would take my life. The Lord judge between us."
The king was so moved that the tears rolled down his cheeks. He remembered how much he had once loved David. Saul said, "You are a better man than I, for you have done good to me while I was trying to kill you. Today the Lord let me fall into your hands, and you spared my life. I know that you will one day be king of Israel." After this talk, Saul took his army and returned to his home at Gibeah. Perhaps he thought he would never trouble David again. David believed Saul would soon change his mind and come looking for him again. He took his men and found another place to hide. About this time, Samuel died. All the Israelites gathered to mourn his death and to bury him at Ramah.
Now let's answer the questions from earlier. Number 1, who did Prince Jonathan take with him to the field, and what was their job? Jonathan took a little boy, and he was to collect the arrows he shot. Number 2, who was hiding behind a great rock in the field? David. Number 3, what sad news did Jonathan bring David? King Saul was determined to kill David. Number 4, what promise did David make to the prince before they parted? That he will always be kind to Jonathan and to his children. Number 5, why wouldn't David permit his soldiers to kill King Saul when Saul lay asleep in the cave? He says that Saul was God's anointed king of Israel. And number 6, how did Saul act when he learned that David spared his life? Saul was sorry he had ever tried to kill David. This week's memory verse is Proverbs 20:22. Do not say, "I'll pay you back for this wrong." Wait for the Lord, and he will avenge you. Think about it. No basket.
Many people who were there called it the best basketball game they'd have ever seen. Westwood High versus Valley Center to determine who would advance to the state basketball championship. From the opening whistle, the contest was a nail-biter. Players from both schools turned in the game of their lives, running, dribbling, passing, rebounding, shooting, and playing defense with an intensity that their fans had never seen before. The momentum of the game seesawed back and forth, with the lead changing hands more than a dozen times. With only 10 seconds to go, Westwood scored a basket that put them ahead by a single point. Valley Center called timeout. The team huddled with their coach, who drew up what would most certainly be the final play of the game. The plan was to work the clock down to 2 seconds, set a few screens to get to the best shooter, a good look at the basket, and let him try to win the game with a last-second shot.
When the whistle blew, the crowd rose to its feet. Their cheers were deafening. Westwood positioned its defense, and Valley Center brought the ball up. As the clock ticked down to its final seconds, the Westwood fans chanted along, 5, 4, 3, 2. The Valley Center players executed the play exactly as the coach had drawn it up. With only 2 seconds remaining, Valley Center's star player took his shot. The ball bounced off the rim and ricocheted off the backboard, right to a Valley Center player who tipped it in. The Valley Center fans went wild. Their team was going to the state finals, or so they thought. While the players and fans celebrated, the referees ran to the official scores table to make sure that the time on the clock had not expired when the ball was tipped in. With all the noise, the referees had been unable to hear the buzzer to determine whether or not the shot was good. The official scorer, an older man who had held the position for many years, suddenly had the game in his hands. He hesitated for a moment, but finally leaned over the table and said, "Tell the Valley Center coach, I'm very sorry, but the shot was no good." Time on the clock had expired. The news changed everything for both teams. The Westwood players and fans started celebrating their victory, while those from Valley Center were left to deal with the agony of defeat. The stunned Valley Center coach sat down on the bench with his head in his hands. The official scorer left his table, walked over, and sat down on the bench beside him. With a tear in his eye, the older man embraced the distraught young coach on the bench and said, "Son, I'm so proud of you." Application.
This story, which is based on actual events, is a powerful example of the cost of living with integrity. It would have been very easy for the official scorer to give the game to his son's team. Instead, though, he chose to preserve his integrity. He did the right thing. This story is also a powerful illustration of what God did when he allowed Jesus to die on the cross. God could have thrown the game, but he took the loss of his precious son in order to preserve his integrity and to provide salvation for the whole world. He did the right thing. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Our memory verse for today is, do not say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord, and he will avenge you. Proverbs 20:22.
This concludes today's lesson.